Six ruthless bikers walked into a late-night bar, thinking they'd found easy prey in a famous rapper taking a break after a performance. What they didn't know was that Snoop Dogg wasn't just any rapper. He was a cultural icon with significant influence over the community, someone who had used his platform to inspire and affect change. By the end of the night, the Steel Wolves MC would learn a brutal lesson about picking the wrong target, and their leader would face a revelation that would change everything. This is the story of how a notorious biker gang messed with the wrong rapper, and how one man's courage transformed an entire community. Before diving back into the story, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The dim lights of Snoop's Groove Bar cast long shadows across the nearly empty parking lot. Snoop Dogg sat at the bar, his signature dreadlocks hanging loosely around his shoulders, still wearing his performance gear after a grueling show. His relaxed demeanor belied the influence and determination that had made him a household name and a community leader. "You really should go home and rest, man," DJ Dre said, sliding onto the stool next to his friend. That show was intense. Snoop wrapped his hands around a glass of iced tea, letting its coolness seep into his tired muscles. "I will, just need a moment to decompress first." The bar was quiet at this hour, populated by the usual mix of night shift workers and late-night revelers. Vanessa, the young bartender who left a high-flying career for a more grounded life, moved gracefully between patrons, serving drinks and taking orders. "That beat you dropped tonight?" DJ Dre continued, his voice low. "If you hadn't brought the house down with that bass, we'd all be in for a quiet night." Snoop smiled. "We all did our part, though," he replied, though they both knew his influence had turned the tide for many in the crowd. The peaceful atmosphere of the bar shattered with the distant rumble of motorcycles. The sound grew louder, echoing off the buildings until 6 bikes pulled into the parking lot, their chrome gleaming under the bar's neon lights. The riders, clad in leather vests emblazoned with a snarling wolf emblem, dismounted with practiced intimidation. Vanessa froze mid-pour, the bottle trembling slightly in her hand. Joe, the bar owner, emerged from behind the counter, his weathered face creasing with concern as he watched the bikers approach. The leader pushed through the door first, his salt-and-pepper beard and cold eyes marking him as someone used to commanding fear and respect. The patch on his vest read, "Wolf, President of the Steel Wolves MC." Behind him came his enforcer, a mountain of a man everyone knew as Tank, followed by 4 other members whose reputations for violence preceded them. Snoop didn't move, didn't even turn around, but his posture shifted almost imperceptibly. His years in the spotlight had taught him how to read a room, how to handle threats with a calm authority that came from understanding his influence. "Well, well," Wolf's voice carried across the bar. "Looks like we found ourselves a nice quiet spot for a late-night snack." The bikers spread out, claiming territory. Tank knocked over a chair as he passed, making several patrons jump. Another member, known as Razor, ran his fingers along the bar as he walked, knocking over glasses. "Can I get you gentlemen something?" Vanessa asked, her confidence cracking slightly under their predatory stares. Wolf's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Sure thing, sweetheart. Why don't you start by telling me what a pretty thing like you is doing in a place like this?" DJ Dre tensed beside Snoop, but Snoop placed a calming hand on his friend's arm. "Not yet, wait. I'm just doing my job," Vanessa replied, taking a step back. "If you'd like to order." "Your job?" Snake, Wolf's right-hand man, laughed. "Honey, with looks like that, you should be doing something a lot more interesting than serving drinks to these folks." An elderly couple in the corner booth tried to quietly gather their things, but Ghost, the silent member of the gang, moved to block their exit. "Leaving so soon?" he asked, his quiet voice somehow more menacing than Wolf's swagger. "Leave them alone." The words, soft but firm, cut through the tension. All eyes turned to Snoop, who hadn't moved from his spot at the bar. He took another sip of his tea, still not turning around. Wolf's eyes narrowed as he approached Snoop. "What was that, buddy?" Now Snoop turned, meeting his gaze with calm confidence. His striking features and natural grace caught Wolf off guard for a moment, but he quickly recovered, letting his eyes roam over Snoop with obvious intent. "I said leave them alone," Snoop repeated. "They're just trying to enjoy their evening in peace." Tank moved closer, cracking his knuckles. "Looks like we've got ourselves a brave little rapper here, boss." Wolf smirked, leaning against the bar next to Snoop. "You know what happens to people who don't mind their own business in this town?" Snoop's lips curved into a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Do you know what happens to people who mistake kindness for weakness?" The air in the bar grew thick with tension. DJ Dre began to stand, but Snoop's hand on his arm kept him seated. Joe reached for the phone behind the counter, but Wolf's sharp glance stopped him. "You've got quite a mouth on you," Wolf said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "Someone ought to teach you some respect." "Years in the music industry taught me plenty about respect," Snoop replied calmly. "It also taught me the difference between real leaders and boys playing dress-up on motorcycles." The words hung in the air like smoke. Tank took a threatening step forward, but Wolf held up a hand, studying Snoop with new interest. "Music industry, huh?" Wolf's smile turned predatory. Well, looks like we've got ourselves a real celebrity here, boys." Razor laughed, the sound sharp and ugly. "What did you do over there, buddy? Hand out mixtapes?" "I've used my music to speak for those without a voice," Snoop said simply. "To educate, to unite, to heal." The implications of those last three words weren't lost on Wolf. His eyes narrowed as he reassessed the man before him, noting for the first time the way Snoop held himself, the calculated awareness in his gaze. "You're out of your element here, rapper," Wolf said softly. "This isn't your stage." Snoop set his glass down carefully. "You're right. This is a place where people come to unwind, to share moments after long days or nights. And right now, you're disturbing that peace. And what are you going to do about it?" Tank demanded, taking another step closer. Snoop finally stood, his movements fluid and controlled despite being dwarfed by Tank's massive frame. He showed no sign of intimidation. "I'm giving you a choice," he said, his voice carrying across the now silent bar. "You can leave now. Enjoy your evening somewhere else, and we can all go about our lives, or you can make this difficult, and we'll see exactly what kind of influence I have these days." The Steel Wolves exchanged glances, their earlier confidence wavering slightly in the face of Snoop's calm authority. Even Wolf seemed unsure for a moment, though he masked it quickly with a harsh laugh. "You hear that, boys?" he called out. "The little rapper thinks he can take on the Steel Wolves?" But something had shifted in the atmosphere of the bar. The other patrons, who had been cowering moments before, began to sit up straighter. Joe's hand moved away from the phone, his expression hardening with resolve. Even Vanessa stood taller, drawing strength from Snoop's unwavering presence. Wolf leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for Snoop. "You've got no idea what you're starting here, buddy." Snoop met his gaze steadily. "Neither do you." Wolf's smirk faltered for just a moment as he studied Snoop's unwavering gaze. The tension in the bar crackled like electricity before a storm. Tank shifted his weight, his massive frame casting a shadow over the bar as he moved closer to his boss. "You think being a celebrity makes you tough?" Wolf's voice carried a dangerous edge. "This isn't a concert, buddy. This is our territory." Snoop remained perfectly still, his posture relaxed but alert. "Territory? This is a bar where people come to enjoy music, talk, and rest after long shifts. The only ones making it a war zone are you and your crew." Snake stepped forward, his leather vest creaking. "Boss, let me show this rapper what happens when people don't know their place." "Stand down," Wolf commanded, raising a hand without taking his eyes off Snoop. "Our little hero here deserves a proper lesson in respect." DJ Dre stood up slowly, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Snoop, maybe we should—" "It's okay, Dre," Snoop said calmly. "Why don't you help Vanessa get the elderly couple to safety? Mr. and Mrs. Jenkins shouldn't have to deal with this nonsense during their anniversary night out." The way Snoop took control of the situation without raising his voice or showing fear seemed to unnerve the bikers more than any challenge could have. Ghost, usually silent, spoke up from near the door. "Boss, something's not right about this one. The way he carries himself." Wolf cut him off with a sharp gesture. "I don't care if he's the king of hip-hop. Nobody talks to us like this in our town. Your town? Snoop's voice carried a hint of amusement. I've spent years lifting up this town, speaking at schools, organizing community events, helping the youth find their voice. What have you done except intimidate people who are just trying to live their lives? Razor knocked over a glass, sending liquid spreading across the bar. Listen to him acting all high and mighty just because he's famous. Platinum albums, sold-out tours, and I didn't just entertain, Snoop interrupted quietly. I've used my platform to empower communities, to give back, to heal the wounds of neglect and violence. I've seen what fear does to a community, and I've fought against it with every lyric I've written. The bar fell silent as his words sank in. Even Wolf seemed to understand they'd stumbled into something far more complicated than a simple late-night intimidation. You think fame makes you untouchable? He growled. But there was a note of uncertainty in his voice. No, Snoop replied. Influence makes me clear-headed. Experience makes me capable. And compassion makes me willing to give you one last chance to walk away before this gets unpleasant. Tank let out a harsh laugh. Unpleasant? There's 6 of us and 1 of you, boy. Numbers don't mean much when you don't know what you're dealing with, Snoop said, echoing the wisdom he'd learned from his community work. Just like those kids you see on the streets every day, everyone thought they were lost causes. But knowing where to apply pressure, understanding people, having a steady hand under pressure, that's what makes the difference between chaos and peace. His words carried a subtle warning that wasn't lost on the bikers. Wolf's face darkened as he realized Snoop was describing more than just his career in music. You threatening us, rapper? He asked, his hand twitching toward the knife he carried at his belt. Not threatening, warning. There are 2 kinds of leaders. Those who rule through fear, and those who lead through respect. Figure out which one I am. DJ Dre and Vanessa had managed to help the elderly couple move toward the back of the bar, away from the mounting tension. Joe stood behind the bar, his hand now resting near the bat he kept for emergencies. Snake moved suddenly, grabbing a handful of coasters and throwing them at Snoop's face, but Snoop was already moving, his reflexes honed by years of navigating the complexities of fame. He sidestepped the distraction with fluid grace, his expression unchanged. That was stupid, he said softly. Now you've made a mess someone will have to clean up. Wolf's patience finally snapped. Enough talk. Tank, show our hero here what real intimidation looks like. Tank grinned and stepped forward, his huge hands balled into fists, but before he could make another move, Snoop spoke again, his voice carrying an authority that stopped him in his tracks. Before you do something you'll regret, you should know that Officer Thompson's son, the one who got into that accident last year, I bailed him out with a benefit concert. Mike's become a good friend since then. He checks on this bar every night around this time. In fact, he should be pulling into the parking lot right about now. As if on cue, red and blue lights flashed through the windows, the distant wail of a police siren grew louder, and Wolf's face contorted with rage. You set us up, he snarled. Snoop shook his head. No, I just know this town better than you think. I know the people I've helped, protected, supported. What do you do except prey on them? The sound of car doors slamming outside made the bikers nervous. Ghost moved away from the door, his earlier confidence evaporating. Boss, we should go, he muttered. We don't need this heat. But Wolf was too invested now, his pride wounded in front of his crew. He stepped closer to Snoop, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. This isn't over, rapper. Not by a long shot. Snoop met his gaze steadily. You're right. It's not over because tomorrow I'll be back in the studio making music that uplifts this community, and you'll still be riding around town trying to convince yourself that fear equals respect. The bar door opened, and Officer Mike Thompson stepped in, his hand resting casually on his holstered weapon. His eyes took in the scene quickly, professional assessment mixing with personal concern when he spotted Snoop. Evening, folks, he said with a casual tone that belied his sharp gaze. Everything okay in here? Wolf hesitated, caught between his desire for revenge and the reality of his situation. Finally, he stepped back, gesturing to his crew. We were just leaving. His eyes never left Snoop. Isn't that right, boys? The other bikers nodded, their earlier bravado replaced by cautious retreat as they filed past Officer Thompson, Wolf turned back one last time. "Sweet dreams, Rapper," he said, trying to maintain some semblance of threat. "Better watch your back." Snoop's reply was calm and measured. "I always do. And Wolf, next time you or your crew need something more than intimidation, remember I've got the community's ear. That's the difference between us." Officer Thompson waited until the roar of motorcycles faded into the distance before turning to Snoop. "You okay?" he asked, genuine concern mixing with professional assessment. "I'm fine, Mike," Snoop replied, finally letting some of the tension ease from his shoulders. "They were just trying to intimidate everyone, nothing I haven't handled before." The bar slowly came back to life. DJ Dre clapped Snoop on the back while Vanessa emerged from the back with the elderly couple. Joe began cleaning up the mess the bikers had left behind, his movements sharp with lingering anger. "Those weren't just any troublemakers," Mike said, taking a seat at the bar. "The Steel Wolves have been causing problems all across the county. We've been trying to build a case against them for months." Snoop poured fresh tea into his cup, his hands steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through his system. "They're bullies, Mike, and like most bullies, they don't know how to handle someone standing up to them. Still," DJ Dre interjected, "you took a huge risk. Wolf isn't known for letting things go. What if they come back?" "Then we'll handle it," Snoop said simply. "I didn't build this platform just to let some wannabe tough guys terrorize innocent people." Meanwhile, at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, the Steel Wolves were regrouping. Wolf paced back and forth, his boots echoing off the concrete floor. The other members watched nervously as their leader's anger built. "A rapper," Wolf spat. "A damn rapper made us look weak. This is unacceptable." Tank leaned against his bike, nursing his wounded pride. "He's not just any rapper, boss. You heard his influence, his community work." "I don't care if he's the king of hip-hop," Wolf exploded. "Nobody disrespects the Steel Wolves. Nobody—" Snake stepped forward, his voice cautious but eager. "So, what's the plan, boss? How do we handle this?" Wolf stopped pacing, a dangerous smile spreading across his face. "We need to send a message, not just to him, but to everyone in town. Show them what happens when someone crosses us." Back at the bar, Mike was taking statements from the other customers. The elderly couple, the Jenkins, were still shaking but grateful. "That young man, Mrs. Jenkins said, patting Snoop's hand. "He reminds me of our grandson, always standing up for what's right, same quiet strength." "Mr. Jenkins nodded. "Never seen anything like it. Didn't raise his voice, didn't make any threats, just stood there like he knew exactly what he was doing." "That's because he did," Mike replied, finishing his notes. "Snoop's got more influence than those bikers could dream of. They just didn't realize it." Joe approached with fresh drinks for everyone. "I've owned this place for 20 years, he said, shaking his head. "Never had trouble I couldn't handle, but tonight was different." "If you hadn't been here, Snoop—" "But I was here," Snoop interrupted gently. "And I'll be here again." "This is my community too, Joe. I'm not going to let anyone threaten it." Vanessa, still slightly pale but recovering her composure, sat down next to DJ Dre. "The way they looked at us, like we were prey or something, but you didn't seem scared at all, Snoop." "Fear is a choice," Snoop explained, remembering his journey in the music industry. "Fear gets people stuck. You learn to channel it. Use it to sharpen your focus instead of letting it paralyze you." Mike's radio crackled, and he stepped away to respond. When he returned, his expression was grim. That was the station. The Steel Wolves have been linked to a string of incidents across 3 counties. Vandalism, assault, extortion. We've never had enough evidence to make anything stick until now. DJ Dre said hopefully, "Maybe, but Snoop, you need to be careful. These guys, they don't play by any rules, and Wolf's got a reputation for holding grudges." "I know the type," Snoop replied, thinking back to his time in the industry. "Men like that, they're used to people backing down. When someone stands up to them, it breaks their whole world view." Outside, the night had grown quieter. The regular customers had mostly left, leaving only the staff and a few dedicated regulars. Mike did another sweep of the parking lot before returning. "I'll have patrols keep an eye on the place," he said. "But maybe you should take a few days off, Snoop. Let things cool down." Snoop shook his head. "That's not happening, Mike. I've got shows to plan, communities to support. I'm not going to hide. DJ Dre squeezed his friend's shoulder. At least let me drive you home tonight. Safety in numbers, right? Before Snoop could respond, the bar's phone rang. Joe answered it, his face darkening as he listened. After a moment, he handed the phone to Snoop. It's for you, he said quietly. Snoop took the receiver, already knowing who it would be. Wolf's voice came through, dripping with false courtesy. Just wanted to make sure you got home safe, rapper, he said. It's a dangerous world out there. Never know what might happen to someone who doesn't understand their place in the food chain. Snoop's voice remained steady. Is that really why you called, Wolf? To show me you can find a phone number? I'm not impressed. There was a pause, then Wolf's tone changed, becoming harder. You humiliated us in front of everyone. That doesn't end well for people. Let me be very clear, Snoop replied, his voice taking on the same tone he'd used on stage before massive crowds. If you or your crew come near this bar again, if you threaten these people or try to intimidate them, you'll learn exactly what a community united behind one man can do. Think about that. He hung up before Wolf could respond, looking up to find everyone staring at him. Mike shook his head in admiration. You really don't back down, do you? Can't, Snoop said simply. The moment you start backing down is the moment they win, and I didn't become who I am to let bullies win here at home. Right, but as he gathered his things to leave, Snoop couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Wolf wouldn't let this go, his type never did. The question wasn't if he would retaliate, but when and how. And when he did, Snoop would be ready, with the full weight of the community behind him. The next morning, Snoop Dogg walked into his recording studio, his alertness undimmed despite the previous night's events. The studio was already buzzing with activity, and his manager, Dwayne, approached him immediately, concern etched on his face. Heard about what happened at Snoop's Groove Bar, he said, falling into step beside Snoop. Word travels fast in this industry. You okay? I'm fine, Snoop replied, adjusting his headphones as he walked. Just another night at the bar. The Steel Wolves aren't just another group of troublemakers, Dwayne warned. Last month, they put 3 people in the hospital. Convenient that none of the victims would press charges. Before Snoop could respond, the studio door burst open, and his crew rushed in with a young man on a stretcher, his face bloody and bruised. Vanessa, who had taken a break from bartending to help at the studio, moved quickly to assist. What do we have? Snoop asked, switching instantly into a mode of leadership and care. Male, mid-20s, found beaten behind Charlie's Club, one of the crew reported. Multiple contusions, possible internal injuries. He said something about wolves before he lost consciousness. Snoop and Vanessa exchanged knowing looks as they began working on the patient. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. Meanwhile, across town at the Steel Wolves warehouse, Wolf was holding court with his inner circle. Maps and photographs were spread across a makeshift table, including several of Snoop entering and leaving the studio. He works late at the studio mostly, Snake reported. Usually stops at Snoop's Groove Bar after his sessions. Lives in that gated community off Sunset Boulevard. Wolf studied the photos, his jaw tight. The cop, Thompson, how often does he check on the bar? Regular patrols every couple of hours, Ghost answered. More frequently since last night. He's got other officers watching, too. They're trying to box us in, Tank growled. Make us look weak? Wolf slammed his fist on the table. We're not weak. And by the time we're done, everyone in this town will remember why they fear the Steel Wolves. Back at the studio, Snoop and Vanessa had stabilized their patient. The young man's injuries told a clear story of calculated violence, meant to send a message. 3 broken ribs, Vanessa said quietly as they updated the charts. Defensive wounds on his arms. They wanted him to suffer. They wanted him found, Snoop corrected. This is Wolf's way of responding to last night, showing what happens to people who don't fall in line. Dwayne joined them, reviewing the patient's scans. Police are on their way to take a statement, but I doubt he'll talk. Fear is a powerful motivator. So is courage, Snoop replied. And it only takes one person standing up to change things. The day progressed with its usual studio sessions and routine meetings, but there was an undercurrent of tension. Word had spread about the confrontation at Snoop's Groove Bar, and Snoop could feel eyes on him as he moved through the corridors. During his break, he found Vanessa in the lounge, clutching a coffee cup with trembling hands. "They spray-painted wolves on my car," she said without preamble. Red paint like blood. The security cameras mysteriously stopped working last night. Snoop sat down beside his friend. "I'm sorry, Vanessa. This is because of me." "No." Vanessa's voice strengthened. "This is because of them. Because they think fear gives them power. But you showed everyone something different last night." Before they could continue, their phones beeped simultaneously. Another emergency was rolling in. As they rushed back to the studio, they found two more victims with similar injuries to their morning patient. "This is just the beginning," Mike Thompson said, arriving to take statements. "Wolf's establishing his reach, showing he can hurt people connected to you, Snoop." Snoop worked efficiently as he treated the new victims, his mind racing. Wolf was escalating faster than he'd expected, which meant he was rattled. Men like him couldn't handle their authority being questioned. "We need to end this," Mike continued, "but without witnesses willing to testify." "Then we make them feel safe enough to testify," Snoop said, finishing a suture. "Show them they don't have to be afraid." As his session wound down, Snoop noticed an increased police presence around the studio. Mike had assigned plainclothes officers to watch the exits, but Snoop knew it wouldn't be enough. The Steel Wolves were sending a message, and they wouldn't stop until someone sent one back. In the locker room, he changed out of his performance gear, checking his phone to find several missed calls from Joe. The bar had received multiple threatening visits throughout the day. Nothing overt, just Steel Wolves members coming in, ordering drinks, leaving without paying, testing boundaries. "You're not going to the bar tonight, are you?" Dwayne asked, watching Snoop gather his things. "Of course I am," Snoop replied. "That's exactly what Wolf expects. He's trying to isolate us, make us change our routines out of fear. The moment we do that, he wins." "At least let me come with you," Vanessa insisted. "Safety in numbers?" Snoop smiled at her loyalty. "No, go home, be safe. I need to know you're not in the line of fire." As Snoop left the studio, he could feel eyes watching him from the shadows. Wolf's surveillance, no doubt. Let them watch, he thought. Let them see that their intimidation tactics wouldn't work. The night air was cool as he walked to his car, his senses alert for any threat. In the music industry, he'd learned to trust his instincts, to read the signs of impending danger. Right now, those instincts were telling him that Wolf was planning something big. The question was, would he be ready when it came? Snoop's Groove Bar was unusually quiet when Snoop arrived, only a few regulars occupying the booths, and Vanessa's usually bright smile was strained as she served drinks. The young bartender hurried over when Snoop entered. "They've been in and out all day," she whispered, glancing nervously at the door. "Different members every couple of hours, just sitting, watching, making everyone uncomfortable." Snoop took his usual seat at the bar, noting the fresh scratches on its surface. Deliberate marks left by knife tips. Joe emerged from the kitchen, relief washing over his weathered face. "Thank God you're here," he said quietly. "They've been asking about you, especially Wolf. He came in around noon, sat in your spot for an hour, just staring at everyone." "He's trying to establish dominance," Snoop replied, accepting a glass of tea. "Show everyone that he controls the space." A motorcycle roar filled the night, then another. The sound grew louder until 3 bikes pulled into the parking lot. Through the windows, Snoop recognized Snake, Ghost, and Razor dismounting their motorcycles. "Should I call Mike?" Joe asked, reaching for the phone. "Not yet," Snoop said calmly. "Let's see what they want." The bikers entered with deliberate swagger, metal chains jingling from their belts. Snake's lips curled into a sneer when he spotted Snoop. "Well, look who it is," he drawled. "Our favorite rapper. Right where Wolf said he'd be." Snoop didn't turn around, just continued sipping his tea. "Your boss send you to do his dirty work, Snake? That's not very leadership-like of him." Ghost moved to one side of the bar, while Razor took the other, effectively boxing in the few remaining customers. Snake approached the bar, standing too close to Snoop. "Boss just wanted us to deliver a message," Snake said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "See what happened last night? That was just a warm-up. Now, we're going to show you what happens when someone really makes us angry by threatening innocent people." Snoop finally turned to face him. That's not strength, Snake. That's cowardice. Snake's face darkened. He reached out suddenly, grabbing Snoop's arm. But before his fingers could tighten, Snoop moved with lightning speed. In one fluid motion, he twisted Snake's hand against the bar, applying pressure to specific points that made him gasp in pain. Fun fact about community leaders, Snoop said quietly, maintaining the hold. We know exactly where every nerve cluster is, every pressure point, every way the human body can experience pain, and how to stop it. Ghost and Razor started forward, but Snoop's voice stopped them. Think carefully about your next move. Your friend here has 3 seconds before these nerve endings start sending signals his brain won't enjoy. Snake's face had gone pale, sweat beading on his forehead. He nodded frantically. Snoop released him, and he stumbled backward, clutching his hand. The other bikers watched with a mix of shock and newfound wariness. Now, Snoop stood slowly, his movements measured. You can tell Wolf that if he wants to send a message, he should deliver it himself. Playing these intimidation games just proves what everyone already knows: he's losing his grip. You're dead, Razor snarled, taking a step forward. You hear me? Dead. No, Snoop's voice carried clearly through the bar. I'm not dead. I've survived the industry. I've seen the worst of humanity, and I've used my voice to heal and unite. You think your threats scare me? He walked toward Razor, who unconsciously took a step back. You want to know what real fear is? It's standing up for what's right when everyone expects you to back down. That's real pressure. This, he gestured around the bar. This is just sad men trying to feel powerful. The bikers exchanged uncertain glances. This wasn't going according to plan. Snake was still flexing his hand, trying to shake off the lingering pain. Wolf's not going to let this go, Ghost warned, speaking for the first time. I'm counting on it, Snoop replied, because sooner or later he's going to realize that fear only works when people allow it to. And I stopped being afraid a long time ago. Just then, red and blue lights flashed outside. Mike Thompson's patrol car pulled into the parking lot, followed by 2 others. That would be my backup, Snoop said calmly. I suggest you leave before Officer Thompson decides to run your license plates. I hear there are quite a few outstanding warrants floating around. The bikers retreated, their earlier bravado replaced by barely concealed fury as they mounted their bikes. Snake turned back for one last threat. Wolf's going to hear about this, and when he does, Snoop interrupted. Remind him what I said about delivering messages himself. I'll be here tomorrow night, same time. If he wants to settle this, he knows where to find me. The motorcycles roared to life, and the steel wolves rode off into the night. Inside, the remaining customers burst into applause. Joe let out a long breath while Vanessa wiped tears of relief from her eyes. Mike entered the bar, hand resting casually on his holstered weapon. Everything okay here? For now, Snoop replied, returning to his tea. But tomorrow night, Wolf will come himself, and then we'll see what the steel wolves are really made of. As he spoke, his phone buzzed with a text from Dwayne. ER just got 2 more victims. Wolf's escalating. Be careful. Snoop closed his eyes briefly, centering himself. The game was changing, and tomorrow would bring either an end to Wolf's reign of terror or the beginning of something much worse. The Steel Wolves' warehouse erupted in chaos as Snake, Ghost, and Razor reported back to Wolf. The gang leader's face twisted with rage as he listened to their account of the confrontation at Snoop's Groove Bar. He made you look like amateurs, Wolf snarled, pacing the concrete floor. A damn rapper embarrassed my best men. Boss, he's not just any rapper, Snake protested, still flexing his hand. The way he moved, the things he knows about pressure points and nerves, he's got training we've never seen before. Tank emerged from the shadows, his massive frame blocking the dim light. Then we hit him where training doesn't matter. Numbers, overwhelming force. Wolf stopped pacing, a dangerous smile spreading across his face. No, he wants me to come to him. Fine. But we're doing this my way. Call everyone in. Tomorrow night we show this town what happens when someone challenges the Steel Wolves. Across town at Snoop's recording studio, the atmosphere was tense but vigilant. Snoop worked with heightened awareness, every new face a potential message from Wolf, every small incident a possible warning. Vanessa hadn't left his side all night, watching her friend with growing concern. That text I sent you, Vanessa said as they checked on a new track. Those two victims, they weren't random. Both of them were regular customers at the bar. Snoop nodded grimly. Wolf's targeting people he thinks are connected to me, trying to isolate me by making everyone afraid to be around me. Is it working? Vanessa asked, glancing at the nearly empty studio. No, Snoop replied firmly. It's just showing everyone what kind of man Wolf really is. A bully who preys on the weak. Dwayne called them into his office during their break. The usually composed manager looked troubled. The community leaders are concerned, he said without preamble. These attacks, the threats, they're affecting our ability to work. People are afraid to come in. What are you saying? Vanessa demanded. I'm saying be careful, Dwayne replied, looking directly at Snoop. We support you, but this situation is becoming dangerous. Wolf's not just targeting you anymore. He's targeting the whole community. Snoop stood, his voice steady. That's exactly why this has to end. Tomorrow night, one way or another, it will. As his session ended, Snoop found Mike Thompson waiting by his car. The police officer's face was grim. We got reports, he said. Wolf's calling in reinforcements, bikers from other chapters, old debts being collected. Whatever he's planning, it's big. Good, Snoop replied, surprising him. Let him bring his army. It won't change anything. You can't face them alone, Mike protested. I won't be alone, Snoop said. I learned something in the industry. True strength isn't about having the biggest force. It's about having the right people beside you. He drove home, his mind already planning for tomorrow night. In his apartment, he opened a locked chest he hadn't touched since his early days in the industry. Inside lay awards, photographs of community events, and something else, a small black case containing personal security gear he'd picked up over the years. His phone buzzed with a message from Joe. They're watching the bar all day, taking pictures of customers. People are scared. Another message followed, this one from Vanessa. Some of them came in today, said tomorrow night's going to be a show everyone will remember. Snoop began methodically preparing, just as he had before, big performances where he knew the stakes were high. He knew Wolf would try to overwhelm him with numbers, thinking that brute force would win the day. But Snoop had faced worse odds in his career, where split-second decisions meant the difference between success and failure. At the warehouse, Wolf gathered his growing force. Dozens of bikes filled the parking lot as members from other chapters arrived. Snake watched the preparations with unease. Boss, he said carefully, maybe we're taking this too far. It's just one man. Wolf rounded on him, eyes blazing. One man who made us look weak. One man who thinks he can stand up to us. After tomorrow night, no one in this town will dare challenge the Steel Wolves again. As night fell, Snoop stood at his window watching the street below. He could see them, bikers riding past periodically, watching his building. Wolf's surveillance, making sure he knew he was being watched. His phone rang. It was Vanessa. The ER is preparing for tomorrow night, she said without greeting. Dwayne's called in extra staff just in case. Snoop, are you sure about this? More sure than I've been about anything since my first hit, Snoop replied. Wolf thinks he can break people by making them afraid. Tomorrow night he learns what real courage looks like. He ended the call and returned to his preparations. Tomorrow would change everything, not just for him and Wolf, but for the entire town. The question wasn't whether he was ready, but whether Wolf understood what he was really starting. Because Snoop hadn't built his empire just to let bullies win at home. And tomorrow night, the Steel Wolves would learn exactly why community leaders were among the most respected and influential figures in any town. The next evening arrived with an unnatural quiet. Snoop's Groove Bar stood like a fortress in the gathering dusk, its neon lights casting colorful shadows across the nearly empty parking lot. Inside, Joe and Vanessa prepared for what they knew would be a night unlike any other. You don't have to stay, Snoop told them as he entered, precisely on schedule. He wore his performance gear, but there was something different about his bearing tonight, a focused intensity that reminded them of his days on stage. This is my place, Joe replied firmly, his weathered hands gripping the bar counter. I'm not letting them drive me out. Vanessa nodded, though her hands trembled slightly as she poured drinks. We're with you, Snoop. All the way. Outside, the sound of motorcycles grew steadily louder. Not just a few bikes this time, dozens of them, their combined roar like approaching thunder. Snoop took his usual seat at the bar, calmly sipping his tea as headlights flooded the parking lot. Mike Thompson's voice crackled over his phone. I count at least 30 bikes. Wolf's called in everyone he knows. My officers are standing by, but stay back unless I signal. Snoop interrupted. This ends tonight one way or another. The bikes surrounded the bar, their riders dismounting in a choreographed display of intimidation. Wolf led them, his leather vest adorned with new patches, symbols of alliance from other chapters. Tank flanked him on one side, Snake on the other, with Ghost and Razor close behind. Quite an army you've brought, Snoop called out as they entered. All this for one rapper? I'm flattered. Wolf's smirk was cold as he surveyed the nearly empty bar. Look around, hero. Where are all your supporters now? Your precious community, they know better than to stand against the steel wolves. Or maybe, Snoop replied evenly, they're exactly where they need to be. As if on cue, headlights flicked on across the street. Cars that had been waiting in shadows came to life. Vehicles filled with studio crew, local business owners, and regular customers of the bar. People Wolf had tried to intimidate now showing they weren't afraid. Wolf's expression darkened. You think a few cars full of civilians scare us? No, Snoop stood slowly. I think you're already scared. That's why you needed to bring an army, because deep down, you know you can't handle this alone. Tank stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. Enough talk. Let's show this rapper what happens when... When what? Snoop interrupted. When you need 30 men to feel brave enough to face one man? Is that the message you want to send? His words struck a nerve. Several of the bikers from other chapters shifted uncomfortably, their respect for Wolf visibly wavering. You're done talking, Wolf snarled. He pulled out a knife, its blade catching the bar lights. Time to learn your place. Snoop's expression didn't change. Last chance, Wolf? Walk away, take your army, and leave this town in peace. Instead of answering, Wolf lunged forward, blade slashing through the air. But Snoop was already moving, his reactions honed by years in the public eye. He deflected Wolf's arm with surgical precision, striking a nerve cluster that made his fingers spasm. The knife clattered to the floor. What the? Wolf stumbled back, shaking his numb hand. Pressure point manipulation, Snoop explained calmly. One of the first things community leaders learn when they need to protect themselves. Want to know what else we learn? Tank charged forward, but Snoop sidestepped with fluid grace, his elbow finding a spot between Tank's ribs that sent him gasping to his knees. Anatomical weak points, Snoop continued, his voice steady. Every vulnerability in the human body, how to heal them and how to exploit them. Snake and Razor moved to flank him, but Snoop's movements were precise and measured. He didn't throw wild punches or fancy kicks. Instead, each motion was calculated, targeting specific points that dropped his attackers with minimal force but maximum effect. In a war zone, he addressed the watching bikers, you learn that efficiency matters more than brute force. Every movement has to count. Every action has to serve a purpose. Wolf watched in growing fury as his best fighters were systematically dismantled by Snoop's clinical precision. The other bikers held back, their earlier confidence replaced by uncertainty. What are you waiting for? Wolf shouted at them. Get him! But before anyone could move, Joe stepped forward, shotgun in hand. Vanessa revealed a baseball bat, and through the windows, the gathered community members could be seen emerging from their vehicles. This is the difference between us, Wolf, Snoop said quietly. You rule through fear. I lead through respect. You intimidate people into following you. These people, he gestured to the gathering crowd, they're here because they choose to be. Wolf looked around, seeing his advantage crumbling. The bikers from other chapters were already backing toward the door, wanting no part of this fight. You're dead, he spat. You hear me? After tonight, you're no... Snoop cut him off. After tonight, your reign of terror is over because these people, he pointed to the growing crowd outside, they're not afraid anymore. And without fear, you have no power. Wolf's face contorted with rage as he watched his carefully constructed image of power crumbling. More bikers were backing away, their loyalty evaporating in the face of Snoop's unwavering confidence and the community's united front. You think this changes anything? He snarled, pulling another knife from his boot. I built this territory from nothing. No rapper is going to take it from me. He charged at Snoop with reckless fury, but his anger made him sloppy. Snoop moved like water, redirecting his momentum while applying precise pressure to his wrist. The second knife joined the first on the floor. You built nothing, Snoop replied calmly. You just took what others created through fear and violence. That's not building, Wolf, that's parasitic. Tank, having recovered his breath, tried to grab Snoop from behind. Snoop dropped and twisted, his fingers finding nerve clusters in Tank's thigh that sent him crashing down again. Boss, Snake called out, still nursing his injured hand. This isn't working. He's not like other targets. Shut up, Wolf roared. He pulled a chain from his belt, swinging it in a wide arc. You're nothing, you hear me? Nothing! Snoop waited until the chain extended fully, then stepped inside its arc. His hand shot out, striking Wolf's solar plexus with surgical precision. He doubled over, gasping. In combat medicine, Snoop addressed the watching crowd, we learned that every part of the body is connected. Pressure points, nerve clusters, vital organs, they're all part of a complex system. Understanding that system means knowing exactly how much force to use. He demonstrated by applying minimal pressure to a point on Wolf's neck that made him sink to his knees. The chain fell from his nerveless fingers. See, I could do serious damage, Snoop continued. But that's not why I'm here. I'm a healer first. My job is to help people, not hurt them. Through the windows, more community members had gathered, studio staff in their gear, local business owners, regular patrons, all standing together, showing Wolf that his reign of terror was over. Last chance, Snoop told him quietly. End this now. Leave town, never come back, and we let you walk away with what's left of your dignity. Wolf's eyes darted around, seeing his support crumbling. The bikers from other chapters were already starting their motorcycles, wanting no part of this humiliation. Even his core members were backing away, their fear of him replaced by something new, respect for someone stronger. You don't know what you're starting, he growled, but his voice lacked conviction. No, Snoop corrected him. I'm ending something. Your time here is done, Wolf. These people aren't afraid anymore. Officer Thompson chose that moment to enter, several deputies behind him. Well, this is interesting. I've got reports of disturbing the peace, attempted assault, criminal threatening. Should I go on? Wolf's face paled as he realized how thoroughly he'd been outmaneuvered. Not only had Snoop beaten him physically, but he'd orchestrated his complete downfall. This isn't over. He tried one last time, but the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. Actually, it is, Mike replied, pulling out handcuffs. We've got witnesses now, lots of them. People ready to testify about everything the Steel Wolves have done. Your reign of terror, it ends tonight. As the police began taking statements, the remaining bikers dispersed, leaving Wolf and his core group to face the consequences of their actions. The community members outside began entering the bar, their fear replaced by a new sense of unity and strength. Joe approached Snoop, shaking his head in amazement. I've never seen anything like that. The way you moved, the control. Community leadership isn't just about making music or giving back, Snoop explained. It's about understanding people, every strength, every weakness. Vanessa, still gripping her baseball bat, smiled through tears. You taught us all something tonight. That standing together is stronger than any threat. As Wolf was led away in handcuffs, he stopped beside Snoop. You think this makes you a hero? He spat. You've just made yourself a target. There are others who won't take kindly to what happened here. Snoop met his gaze calmly. Then they'll learn the same lesson you did. Strength isn't about causing fear, Wolf. It's about standing up to it. The bar erupted in applause as Wolf was escorted out, but Snoop knew this wasn't truly the end. There would be ripples from tonight's events, consequences that would need to be faced. But looking at the united community around him, he knew they would face whatever came together. Because tonight had proven something powerful, that when people stood up to bullies, when they refused to be intimidated, real change was possible. The night wasn't over yet, and there were still loose ends to tie up, But the reign of the steel wolves was finished, broken not by superior force, but by the courage of one man who refused to back down in a community that found its strength in unity. The aftermath of Wolf's arrest transformed Snoop's Groove Bar into an impromptu community center. Police officers took statements while studio staff checked on anyone who needed medical attention. Through it all, Snoop moved quietly, helping where needed, his leadership blending seamlessly with his community spirit. Multiple arrest warrants, Mike informed Snoop as he bandaged Snake's wrist. Despite everything, Snoop couldn't ignore someone needing care. Wolf's going away for a long time. The DA's been building a case for months, just needed witnesses willing to testify. Sometimes people just need to see that standing up is possible, Snoop replied, securing the bandage. Tank refused to meet his eyes, his massive frame somehow smaller in defeat. Snake, waiting for his own transport to jail, watched Snoop work with a mix of fear and confusion. "Why are you helping us after everything?" "Because it's what I do," Snoop said simply. "Being strong doesn't mean being cruel?" Vanessa burst through the door, her face flushed with excitement. "You need to see this." She held up her phone, showing social media exploding with videos of the confrontation. "It's everywhere. People are sharing their own stories about the Steel Wolves, coming forward about past incidents. It's like a dam breaking." But amid the celebration, Snoop noticed Ghost hanging back, his usual silence now tinged with something else. He approached him carefully. "Something you want to say?" Ghost glanced around before speaking softly. "Wolf has connections. Other chapters, bigger organizations. They won't let this go." "Is that a threat or a warning?" Snoop asked, studying his face. "A warning," Ghost replied. "What you did tonight, it's bigger than just our chapter. The Steel Wolves have a reputation. They can't let someone challenge that and walk away." Before Snoop could respond, commotion erupted outside. A young woman burst into the bar, her face streaked with tears. "Please, you have to help." "It's my brother. The other bikers, they're hurting him." Snoop was moving before anyone else could react. Outside, in the dim light of the parking lot, 3 bikers who'd fled earlier were teaching what they thought was a brutal lesson. Their victim, a young man barely out of his teens, was curled on the ground. "That's enough," Snoop's voice cut through the night. The bikers turned, their faces twisting with recognition and hatred. "This isn't your business, rapper," one snarled. "Just sending a message about loyalty." 3 against 1, that's not a message," Snoop replied, moving closer. "That's cowardice." They charged him together, thinking numbers would prevail where Wolf had failed. They were wrong. Snoop moved like he had on stage, efficient, precise, wasting no motion. Within moments, all 3 were on the ground, their bodies betraying them in ways they didn't understand. "Pressure points and nerve clusters," he explained as he helped the young man up. "The human body is remarkably vulnerable if you know where to strike. Now let's get you inside and checked out." Back in the bar, as he treated the young man's injuries, Mike pulled him aside. "Got word from the station? Other Steel Wolves chapters are already calling emergency meetings. This is stirring up a hornet's nest." "Good," Snoop replied, surprising him. "Let them come. Every bully needs to learn the same lesson. Fear only works when people allow it." Joe approached, wringing his hands. "Maybe you should take some time off, lay low until things settle." "No," Snoop's voice was firm. "That's exactly what they want, for people to hide, to change their lives out of fear. I didn't do that in the industry, I won't do it here." As if to emphasize his point, more customers began arriving at the bar. Word had spread about Wolf's arrest, and people were emerging from their homes, reclaiming their community spaces. "Besides," Snoop continued, watching the bar fill with life again, "this isn't just about me anymore. Look around. These people have found their courage. They're not going to give that up easily." Vanessa joined them, her phone still buzzing with notifications. "The community leaders called. They want to implement new security measures, set up a support system for victims of intimidation." "You've started something, Snoop." "We all did," Snoop corrected her. "Every person who stood up tonight, who refused to look away, they're all part of this." But as he watched the celebration unfold, Snoop couldn't shake Ghost's warning. The Steel Wolves were part of a larger network, and tonight's events would have repercussions beyond their small town. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You've made some dangerous enemies. Hope you're ready for what comes next." Snoop deleted the message without responding. He'd faced worse odds in the music world, dealt with more dangerous enemies. Whatever came next, he would face it with the same determination that had carried him through years of adversity. The night was far from over, and this victory, while significant, was just the beginning. But looking at the renewed spirit in the bar, the way people held their heads higher and spoke more freely, Snoop knew it had been worth it. Because sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest acts of courage, like a rapper refusing to back down in a late-night bar. Dawn was breaking over Snoop's recording studio as he finished his first session since the confrontation at the bar. News of the incident had spread like wildfire, transforming his typical studio day into something entirely different. People watched him with a mix of awe and curiosity, while some of his colleagues seemed unsure how to act around him now. 3 more Steel Wolves chapters have reached out to the police, Vanessa reported during their break. They're not happy. Some guy named Reaper, he's apparently higher up in their organization. Snoop continued reviewing his tracks, his expression unchanged. They're trying to create fear through reputation. It's a common tactic. This isn't the music industry, Snoop, Vanessa pressed. These guys, they've got connections everywhere. Drugs, weapons, protection rackets. Before Snoop could respond, Dwayne hurried into the break room, his face grave. "We've got incoming trauma. Multiple victims all showing signs of gang-related violence." The studio burst into controlled chaos as emergency services arrived. 4 victims, all regular visitors to Snoop's Groove Bar, had been beaten severely. The message was clear. The Steel Wolves' retaliation had begun. "They were waiting outside my house," one victim gasped as Snoop treated him. "Said this is what happens when people stand up to the wrong crowd." Across town at the police station, Mike Thompson was dealing with his own crisis. Reports were flooding in. Businesses vandalized, people threatened, a clear pattern of intimidation spreading through the community. "It's coordinated," he told Snoop when he called to check in. "These aren't just random acts. Someone's orchestrating this, trying to undo everything that happened last night. They want to show that one victory doesn't change anything. They want to show that fear still rules," Snoop replied, his voice steady. "That hospital board called an emergency meeting?" Snoop stood before the community leaders, still in his studio gear as they outlined their concerns. "We understand your intentions were good," the chairman began, "but this situation has become dangerous. We're receiving threats. People are afraid to come in." "With all due respect," Snoop interrupted, "people were already afraid. The Steel Wolves were already terrorizing this community. The only difference now is that people are talking about it openly." "Be that as it may," another board member interjected, "perhaps it would be best if you took a leave of absence, just until things settled down." Snoop's response was calm but firm. "The moment we start changing our lives, hiding away because of their threats is the moment they win. I won't do that." As he left the meeting, his phone buzzed with a message from an encrypted number. "Reaper wants to meet. Neutral ground. Just talk." He showed the message to Mike, who immediately objected. "It's a trap. These people don't want to talk. They want to make an example of you." "Maybe," Snoop agreed. "But if they're willing to go this far to send a message, they won't stop with just intimidation. Meeting them head-on might be the only way to prevent more people from getting hurt." Back at Snoop's Groove Bar, the atmosphere was tense but determined. Despite the threats, customers still came, maybe fewer than before, but each one an act of defiance against intimidation. "They hit 3 other bars last night," Joe reported as Snoop took his usual seat. "Places that stood with us, broke windows, threatened staff." Vanessa, sporting a black eye from an encounter with unknown assailants, still managed to smile as she served drinks. "But we're still here. That's what matters, right?" Snoop studied the bruise on Vanessa's face, his community spirit and industry experience merging into cold clarity. The Steel Wolves were escalating, trying to prove that their power remained unbroken. His phone buzzed again. "Meeting tonight, midnight, Old Factory on Mason Street? Come alone, or we start hitting studios next." This time Snoop replied, "I'll be there." Vanessa, reading over his shoulder, grabbed his arm. You can't be serious. This is exactly what they want. No, Snoop corrected his friend. What they want is for everyone to be afraid again, to prove that standing up only leads to more pain. He paused, remembering similar situations in the industry. Sometimes you have to meet force with force, not to fight, but to show you won't be intimidated. As night fell, the tension in the town was palpable. Everyone knew something was coming. The question wasn't if the Steel Wolves would strike back, but how hard. Snoop prepared carefully, drawing on both his community leadership and his experience in high-stakes situations. If Reaper wanted to talk, he'd talk. But if he wanted something else, well, he hadn't survived in the music world by being unprepared. The old factory loomed ahead, its abandoned shell a perfect setting for what was to come. As Snoop approached, he could sense eyes watching from the shadows. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about showing everyone that courage didn't end with one victory. The real fight was just beginning. The old factory's metal doors groaned as Snoop pushed them open. Moonlight filtered through broken windows, casting strange shadows across rusted machinery. His footsteps echoed in the vast space as he moved with practiced caution, every sense alert. "I have to admit," a deep voice called from the darkness, "you're either very brave or very foolish to come alone." Reaper emerged from the shadows, tall, lean, with gray-streaked hair and a face marked by old scars. Unlike Wolf's theatrical swagger, Reaper carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone used to real power. "And you're either very confident or very desperate to risk meeting me like this," Snoop replied, noting the positions of at least 6 other figures in the shadows. After what happened to Wolf, Reaper's laugh was surprisingly genuine. He was a useful tool who forgot his place. But you're something else entirely. Rapper turned community leader, taking down an entire Steel Wolves chapter single-handedly. Impressive. "If you're trying to recruit me, save your breath," Snoop responded. "Recruit you?" Reaper moved closer, studying him with cold interest. "No, I'm trying to understand you. See, what happened at that bar, it's causing problems. Other chapters are getting nervous. People are starting to question things they shouldn't." A figure moved in the shadows to Snoop's left. He recognized Snake, recently released on bail, his hand still bandaged from their last encounter. "You've started something," Reaper continued. "A ripple effect. 3 other towns have reported people standing up to our chapters. Witnesses coming forward about past incidents. It's bad for business." "Sounds like a you problem," Snoop replied calmly. "Maybe it's time for a new business model, one that doesn't rely on terrorizing innocent people." Reaper's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Here's my offer. Leave town tonight. We'll even provide financial compensation for your trouble. Start fresh somewhere else. And if I refuse, then what happened today? The beatings, the vandalism, that was just a preview. We'll destroy everything and everyone you care about. The studio, the bar, your friends. No one will be safe." Snoop didn't flinch. "You know what I learned in the music industry? Threats only work when people are alone, isolated. But when they stand together, that's when bullies like you lose their power." "You think you've created some kind of movement?" Reaper's voice hardened. "One rapper inspiring people to stand up to the big bad bikers? This isn't a movie, buddy. This is reality." "You're right," Snoop agreed. "This is reality, and the reality is your intimidation tactics don't work anymore. Not on me, not on this town." He took a step closer to Reaper, noting how his men tensed. "Want to know what else I learned in the industry? How to tell when someone's bluffing? You're not here because you want to make a deal. You're here because you're scared." Reaper's facade cracked slightly. "Scared of what?" "Of losing control. Every person who stands up, every witness who comes forward, they're showing others it's possible. And once people stop being afraid, your whole empire crumbles." A sudden movement, one of Reaper's men charging forward, but Snoop was ready. He sidestepped, his hand finding pressure points that dropped him to his knees. "That's not possible," the man gasped. "I never even saw—" "Community leadership," Snoop explained to Reaper. "We learn every weakness in the human body, every vulnerable point, not to cause harm, to heal, but knowledge works both ways." Reaper's expression darkened. "You think your parlor tricks will work against all of us?" "No," Snoop replied. "I think this will He pulled out his phone, showing the live signal being transmitted. Everything since I walked in has been streaming to the police, the FBI's gang task force, and every news outlet in the state. Your threats, your admission about the attacks, all of it. The shadows around them came alive as police officers emerged, weapons drawn. Mike Thompson's voice rang out. "Everyone, free hands where we can see them!" Reaper's cold confidence finally shattered. "You set us up!" "No," Snoop corrected him. "You did that yourself by thinking fear was enough to keep people in line, by underestimating what people will do when they've had enough of being afraid." As the police moved in, Snoop stepped closer to Reaper. "Here's my counteroffer. Face what's coming, take responsibility, show your people that real strength isn't about causing fear. It's about owning up to your mistakes." The factory erupted in controlled chaos as officers took control, but Snoop's eyes stayed locked with Reaper's. Two leaders recognizing the end of a battle neither had expected. This one wouldn't end here, but it had fundamentally changed the game.